killings all began like this. A middle-aged man pulled over to pick up Lee Wuornos.
A different person than she was in 1983, and it's if you sit down with Carla Faye Tucker, it's very difficult not to be touched by her.
I can't even comprehend what Bobby's family went through.
Tissue that was found on the gun was an exact match to the tissue that I had submitted to the lab.
Call it death row?
No, we call it life row.
It's life row.
Life row? Why?
Because we're not dying, we're living.
Number 14. Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos was born in Rochester, Michigan to a troubled family. Her father, Leo Dale Pittman, was a convicted child molester who ended herself in prison. Her mother, Diane Wuornos, was an alcoholic who abandoned her children when Eileen was a child. Her grandparents raised Eileen, but she was often harmed and neglected. As a teenager, Wuornos ran away from home and became involved in body work.
And that's a hell of a lot of men I went through before the next jerk came along and I used protection.
Killings all began like this. A middle-aged man pulled over to pick up Lee Wuornos. You
I
killed
looked at
7
the
men,
number.
7 strangers. Does that not make you a serial killer?
So I didn't kill them every day, did I?
The way Lee tells it, she was just a hooker trying to turn a trick, and the men knew it.
She also struggled with mental illness, including borderline personality disorder and dissociative identity disorder. In 1989, Wuornos began slaying her male clients. Between December 1989 and September 1990, the bodies of 7 men were found along the highways of northern and central Florida. Items belonging to 2 victims were pawned near Daytona Beach, and the alias names used were traced to Wuornos through thumbprints left on the pawn shop cards. Wuornos confessed to slaying all 6 men. She claimed she acted in self-defense, as the men had physically attacked or attempted to attack and exploit her. In one of the cases, evidence was found that the culprit may have tried to attack her. However, the evidence in other cases against her was strong, and she was convicted of 6 slayings. Within 2 weeks of her arrest, Wuornos and her attorney had sold movie rights to her story. The case resulted in several books, movies, and even one opera. The court sentenced Wuornos to the ending row in each case, where she met her demise in 2002.
Did I go out there every day and say, I'm gonna kill? If I did, there would
Well,
be
no,
hundreds.
it took you 12 months.
Yeah.
Last day of her miserable life on the road here, ordering her first beer at 11 in the morning. Self-defense.
Yeah.
Lee, the first one, perhaps, the second maybe, but
So what?
7 times?
Number 13. Carla Faye Tucker. Carla Tucker was born in Houston, Texas in 1959. She had a troubled childhood marked by harm and neglect. She dropped out of school in the 10th grade and began using drugs and alcohol. She also became involved in body work. In 1983, Tucker and a male accomplice, Daniel Ryan Garrett, broke into an apartment in Houston.
And the tension and the pressure build, and it will continue to build as we get closer. And it's kind of terrifying in many respects.
A different person than she was in 1983, and it's if you sit down with Carla Faye Tucker, it's very difficult not to be touched by her.
That we had to say goodbye, and that got a little hard. She said one of the most beautiful prayers that I've ever heard.
With a pickaxe, they attacked the 2 occupants, Jerry Lynn Dean and Deborah Ann Thornton. Dean and Thornton tried to fight back but were both slain. Tucker was arrested and charged with the slaying. During the trial, she accepted a bargain, pleaded guilty to slaying Dean, and testified against her accomplice. Though the capital penalty was hardly ever sought for female slayers, Tucker and Garrett were sentenced to the ending row in late 1984. Number 12. Barbara Elaine Wood Graham. Graham was born Barbara Elaine Ford in Oakland, California, to Hortense Ford, who earned her living through body work. When Barbara was 2, her mother was still in her late teens and was sent to reform school. Barbara was raised by strangers and extended family. As a teenager, she was arrested for vagrancy and sentenced to serve time at the same reform school where her mother had been. Released in 1939, Barbara tried to make a new start for herself. She married thrice, but all her attempts at domesticity failed. Barbara then took up body work. She soon became involved in gambling and illegal drug circles, cultivating several friends who were ex-convicts and known career criminals. In March 1953, Barbara joined her associates in robbing Mabel Monahan. Barbara reportedly gained entry by asking to use her phone. The gang demanded money and jewels from Monahan, but the 64-year-old widow refused to give them anything. At this point, according to the statement and testimony of John True, Barbara began viciously pistol whipping Mrs. Monahan, cracking her skull, and then suffocating her with a pillow. One of her associates was later arrested on a separate charge and confessed to robbing Mrs. Monahan. An undercover officer attempted to cozy up with her, got her to admit what she had done, and then arrested her. Graham was convicted and sentenced to the end row. Number 11. Emilia Carr. Emilia Lily Carr was born to a troubled family. At age 15, she disclosed harm by her father to her school but later withdrew her statement. Her father was also later arrested and imprisoned for attempting to hire someone to slay his family. In November 2008, Carr got engaged to Joshua Damian Fulgham, who married someone else, Heather Strong, a month later. However, Carr maintained contact with them and babysat Strong's children, according to Carr's family. Carr and Fulgham continued their relationship while Strong began seeing someone else. In February 2009, Heather Strong disappeared while working at an Iron Skillet restaurant at a petrol gas station near Interstate Route 75 in Reddick, Florida. Her remains were discovered on March 19, buried in a shallow grave near McIntosh, Florida, next to a storage trailer.
Yes, we were charged. I was shaking so bad.
Call it death row?
No, we call it life row.
It's life row.
Life row? Why?
Because we're not dying, we're living. It's hard to answer because it's like I wasn't where all that happened. A desire to make women look so bad in the media, you know?
Carr was arrested on March 24 after authorities noticed her frequent statements without an attorney present. Undercover audio recordings of Carr discussing details of the crime with Fulgham's sister further incriminated her. The evidence showed that Carr tricked Strong into the storage trailer at her mother's home, placed a plastic bag over her head, and attempted to break her neck. Strong eventually died from asphyxiation while bound to a chair with a duct tape. The motive was jealousy, as Carr viewed Strong as a rival in her affections for Fulgham. During the trial, the prosecutor filed notice of intent to pursue the capital penalty due to the heinous nature of the crime. The jury found Carr guilty after only 2.5 hours of deliberation. Number 10. Wanda Jean Allen. Wanda Jean Allen was the first woman of color to be sentenced to the end row in the United States. Wanda Jean Allen and Gloria Leathers were a lesbian couple who shared a house in the Village at 2245 Hasley. Any officer on patrol had been dispatched to that address for a domestic dispute at least once or twice. The two had met in prison in 1982. Sometime later, after both were released from the jail, the two moved into Allen's house. On December 1, 1988, the stormy relationship came to a violent and deadly conclusion. Allen and Leathers had engaged in an altercation in the morning where cops had been dispatched. Later that day, Leathers told Allen that their relationship was over and she was moving out. While hastily helping to pack her daughter's belongings, Gloria's mother heard Allen threaten to slay Gloria. Just after 3 o'clock that afternoon, as Leathers walked up the drive of the police department to file a complaint against Allen, officers inside the department heard what sounded like a gunshot. They ran outside to see Allen holding a weapon and fleeing the scene. Paramedics rushed to the scene and attempted to help Leathers, but she later passed away. Allen was arrested a few days later in Duncan, Oklahoma, after one of her relatives called the Crime Stoppers hotline to report her whereabouts and collect the reward for her capture. Ellen was tried, convicted, and sentenced to the ending row. Number 9. Krista Pike. Krista Gale Pike was born in West Virginia on March 10, 1976. Her mother would drink while pregnant with Krista, and doctors later said this likely contributed to an underdeveloped brain. Her parents didn't want to be involved in her life, and she was given to her grandmother. But when her grandmother passed away, Krista went to live with her mother, who didn't care for her. Pike lived a troubled life growing up. After dropping out of high school, Krista joined the Job Corps, where she met her then-boyfriend, Tedderell Shipp. Krista grew jealous of a 19-year-old university-goer, Colleen Slemmer, whom Krista believed to be involved with Tedderell, which fueled her anger and led to a violent confrontation. On January 12, 1995, Pike and her accomplices lured Colleen to an isolated area on campus. They attacked her, beat her with a rock, and used a box cutter to carve a pentagram into her chest. Pike smashed Colleen's skull and kept a piece of it, later showing it around campus. The authorities quickly apprehended Pike and her accomplices. In March 1996, Krista Pike stood trial for the slaying of Colleen Slemmer. She was convicted and sentenced to capital punishment, becoming the youngest woman in the United States to receive the capital penalty. Number 8. Taylor Renee Parker. A Texas woman convicted of slaying a pregnant woman and ripping out her unborn baby has been sentenced to the capital punishment, a fitting punishment for the heinous crime. A jury of 6 men and 6 women in Bowie County deliberated for less than 2 hours before handing down the fatal sentence for 29-year-old Taylor Renee Parker. Parker was convicted of capital slaying for the ghastly slaughter of Reagan Michelle Simmons Hancock, 21 years old, and her infant daughter in New Boston in October 2020. Simmons Hancock's mother, Jessica Brooks, called Parker an evil piece of flesh demon. In the 10 months leading up to the slaying, Parker had faked her own pregnancy in an elaborate scheme to prevent her boyfriend from leaving her, prosecutors said. She wore pregnancy disguises, fake ultrasounds, posted about pregnancy online, and even threw a gender reveal party for the fake baby. Parker, who could not conceive after a hysterectomy, told her boyfriend she would be induced to deliver the baby on the day of the slaying. Prosecutors said she intensively researched how to fake a pregnancy and watched numerous videos on delivering babies preterm at 35 weeks, which is how far along Simmons Hancock was when she was slain. On the morning of October 9, 2020, Parker crushed Simmons Hancock's skull with a hammer and knifed her more than 100 times in her home before removing her baby from her womb with a scalpel. Parker fled with the infant, a girl who later perished. After her sentencing, Parker was to be moved to the Mountain View Unit in Gatesville, Texas, where the state houses its female row inmates. Number 7. Darlie Lynn Peck Routier. Darlie Routier, a full-time mother from Rolette, Texas, lived with her young 2 sons, Devin and Damon. On June 6, 1996, she contacted emergency services, claiming that an invader had infiltrated her home and knifed her along with her 2 children. Her elder son, Devin, age 6, managed to live, but the younger Damon, age 2, succumbed to his injuries. Darlie was transported to the hospital with serious injuries to her arm and throat, allegedly from warding off the attacker. However, law enforcement found no signs of forced entry or any evidence supporting her claim of an intruder, including fingerprints or footprints. The sole weapon discovered on the premises was a knife from Darlie's own kitchen. Subsequently, Darlie was apprehended on 2 charges of capital slaying. A grand jury indictment followed, and the prosecution proceeded on the charge concerning the slaying of Damon, her younger child, which made a capital punishment sentence feasible given his tender age. Darlie's trial began in 1997. The prosecution posited that Darlie had slain her sons in a rage after an extramarital affair came to light. They highlighted her lack of defensive wounds and inconsistencies in her story, including changing clothes post the incident. Conversely, the defense insisted on Darlie being a victim of home invasion, arguing she had repelled the attacker in self-defense. They also claimed the prosecution's case was speculative, devoid of any tangible evidence connecting Darlie to the slayings. The jury pronounced Darlie guilty of capital slaying, sentencing her fatally. She remains on the row. Number 6. Lisa Marie Montgomery. Lisa Marie Montgomery was held guilty for the horrifying slaying of Bobby Joe Stinnett in 2004. In a gruesome incident, Montgomery butchered the pregnant Stinnett, extracted her unborn baby from her womb, and abducted the baby. The crime was instigated through an online interaction on a rat terrier chat room, Ratter Chatter, where Montgomery, posing as Darlene Fisher, claimed to be pregnant as well and bonded with Stinnett over their supposed pregnancies. She then scheduled a meeting at Stinnett's residence under the ruse of purchasing a rat terrier.
Lisa told me that she cut the cord, held it between her fingers, put the baby inside her coat.
She doesn't get that opportunity to hold her baby because that woman took that right away from her.
This was not a spontaneous fit of anger or rage. This was meticulously planned out.
I can't even comprehend what Bobby's family went through.
On December 16, 2004, Montgomery went forth with a brutal crime. She strangled Stinnett with a pink neon rope at her home in Skidmore, Missouri, and surgically removed the premature baby from her womb. Following the act, she attempted to portray the newborn girl as her biological child. Stinnett's mother, Becky Harper, found her daughter in a pool of blood an hour post the attack. She reported the incident to 911, recounting her daughter's injuries as if her stomach had exploded. Stinnett could not be revived by the paramedics and was declared deceased at St. Francis Hospital in Maryville, Missouri. The subsequent day, Montgomery was apprehended at her farmhouse and the infant was recovered. The baby girl, named Victoria Jo Stinnett, was returned to her father, Zeb Stinnett. In her trial, Montgomery was prosecuted under the Federal Kidnapping Act for kidnapping resulting in a demise. She was argued to have pseudocyesis, a mental disorder that leads a woman to falsely assume she is pregnant and display signs of pregnancy. Renowned neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran suggested her crime resulted from severe pseudocyesis delusion triggered by her traumatic past involving physical exploitation and PTSD. Contrarily, forensic psychiatrist Park Dietz dismissed the theory, deeming Montgomery free of pseudocyesis. After a trial on October 22, 2007, Montgomery was found guilty of slaying. 4 days later, the jury proposed a capital sentence. Montgomery was finally put down by lethal injection on January 13, 2021. Number 5. Lisa Cunningham. Mom of 6, Lisa Cunningham could become the first Australian woman on the row in the United States if she's found guilty over her stepdaughter Sana's demise. Cunningham, 48, has been behind bars in Arizona since she and her husband Jermaine was arrested over the 6-year-old's demise in 2017. They are both charged with 1 count of first-degree slaying and several counts of child harm. They've pleaded not guilty. If the couple is convicted, prosecutors have indicated that they will apply the capital penalty, something Australia strongly opposes. The 48-year-old, who was born and raised in Adelaide, has been waiting for her day in court since her arrest. Sana Cunningham, Jermaine's biological daughter, perished in February 2017. In the months leading to her demise, after she'd turned 6, the family noticed concerning changes in her behavior. She started forgetting basic tasks like opening a door or a water bottle. The family couldn't understand what was happening to their little girl. In July 2016, Sana was diagnosed with acute schizophrenia. Her parents said she had been tearing at her skin and hearing voices urging her to slay. She would urinate and defecate on the floor inside the house and gauge at her eyes. Child safety authorities visited the Cunningham household twice. Cunningham said they watched Sana decline and knew of her condition. The Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is providing consular assistance to the 48-year-old, and we have yet to see how her case will turn out. Number 4. Pamela Perillo. In February 1980, Linda Fletcher and Mike Brittle, a newlywed couple from California, met Pamela Perillo, and soon after they became involved in a robbery. To avoid arrest, the couple fled to Arizona and was later joined by Perillo, who had also had an arrest warrant. They hitchhiked to Texas, where they met Bob Banks, a man relocating his belongings. Banks offered them a ride and a job to help him move, unknowingly setting the scene for a horrific crime. Banks, unaware of the danger, treated his guests to meals and shelter. After observing his wealth and firearm collection, Brittle and Perillo hatched a plot to rob him. On the evening of February 21, 1980, the trio went to a rodeo and a restaurant with Banks, who later returned home with them. At the house, they found Bob Skeens, a friend of Banks who had come to help him move. The following day, Brittle and Perillo planned an ambush, arming themselves with Banks' weapons. When Banks and Skeens returned from a coffee run, they were caught off guard and subdued. Brittle and Perillo tied them up, robbed Banks, and ransacked his bedroom. In an unimaginable act of cruelty, they strangled Banks and Skeens while recording the slaughters, then casually ate the breakfast the victims had brought. After committing the slaying, Brittle, Perillo, and Fletcher fled to Denver, abandoning Skeens' Volkswagen with incriminating evidence inside. When Banks failed to show up at work for 2 days, his supervisor discovered the crime scene. The police investigation and subsequent trials led to Brittle's fatal punishment in 1995, Fletcher's probation, and Perillo's sentencing to life imprisonment plus 30 years for aggravated robbery after her capital sentence was overruled on appeal. Number 3. Melissa Elizabeth Lucio. Melissa Elizabeth Lucio, born June 18, 1969, was the first Hispanic woman sentenced to the capital penalty in Texas. She was convicted of the slaying of her 2-year-old daughter, Mariah. The prosecution claimed the child's bruising and internal injuries resulted from harm and neglect, while the defense attributed them to a fall down the stairs. Lucio's case came under the spotlight in the 2020 documentary, The State of Texas vs. Melissa. Throughout, she maintained her innocence. Her punishment, set for April 27, 2022, was stayed by an appeals court 2 days prior. Number 2. Christina Marie Riggs. Christina Marie Riggs, a licensed nurse, was convicted of slaughter by smothering her 2 preschool-aged children in their beds at the family Sherwood home. On November 4, 1997, Riggs obtained the antidepressant Elavil from her pharmacist, the painkiller morphine, and the toxic potassium chloride from the hospital where she worked. The heart-stopping potassium chloride is the same drug used in the lethal cocktail injected into condemned inmates in the end house. Riggs gave the children a small amount of Elavil to put them to sleep. Then she placed each of the children in their beds. About 10 p.m., she injected 5-year-old Justin with undiluted potassium chloride. But unless it is diluted, the drug causes burning and pain. Justin woke and cried out in terror. She then smothered the boy with a pillow. Number 1. Marilyn K. Plants. Marilyn K. Plants was put down via lethal injection on May 1, 2001 at Oklahoma State Penitentiary for the slaying of her husband, James Earl Plants, in 1988. William Bryson, also sentenced to the capital punishment, was put down in 2000 for his role in the slaying. A third accomplice, Clinton Eugene McKimble, received life imprisonment after pleading guilty and testifying against Plants and Bryson. The case was built around the allegations that Plants had arranged her husband's slaying to claim 2 life insurance policies worth $319,000. James Plants was brutally beaten with baseball bats and subsequently burned in his pickup truck. Marilyn Plants, Bryson, and McKimball were charged with first-degree slaying, with prosecutors pushing for the capital penalty.
Gasoline or something in that order was used, that it burned so hot that the glass actually melted.
There were only 2 people in the house, according to Joyce Cohen, when this homicide occurred.
Tissue that was found on the gun was an exact match to the tissue that I had submitted to the lab.
And one of them ends up dead, you should suspect the other person until your suspicions are relieved.
Plant's punishment made her the second woman to be put down in Oklahoma since 1907. That's all for today, folks. See you next time.